Welcome to the Roaming Yeti Podcast, where we share stories and tips to inspire you to roam your neighborhood and the world. I am your host and Head Yeti, Beth Schillaci. In today's episode, I speak with Sally Asher about New Orleans, and specifically around the history and stories of their cemeteries. Sally is the owner and operator of Red Sash Tours and is passionate about revealing the unusual, outrageous, and untold stories of New Orleans. An award-winning writer and professional photographer, Asher believes history doesn't have to be stuffy and isn't about merely listing dates and facts. You ready? Let's roam. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of the Roaming Yeti Podcast. I am really lucky to have Sally Asher with us. She is she's from New Orleans, city guide this week. She is from New Orleans. She is a local writer and author, and she also owns and operates Red Sash Tours, which I'm going to definitely have her tell us more about. And I will make sure that I have the link in the show notes for everyone, so you can check her out on your next trip down there. Sally, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So today we're talking New Orleans. I forgot to ask earlier, like how long have you grown up in? Are you a lifelong resident of New
I,
Orleans or?
I was born and raised in Washington State. I've been here since after school since, gosh, 94. I can't believe it's been that long. It was supposed to only be a couple years. It kind of grew on me unexpectedly, and I've been here ever since.
I feel like that's easy for New Orleans to sort of grow on you and bring you into.
It is. I do tend to meet most people come to New Orleans and they get this really emotional reaction and they go home, they quit their jobs, they sell everything they own, they come back. It's like it was love at first sight. This is karma. This is where I'm supposed to be. Mine was not that way. I
Okay.
enjoyed it. I liked it. But for me, it was kind of like falling in love with your best friend. Like years later, it dawns on you, like, hey, I love you. And I can't imagine being anywhere else. So while I enjoyed it and I liked it, it was supposed to be a short time gig, and it did sneak up on me and definitely got its roots in me. But there are many, many people I've met come here one visit, and that's it. It's all
And
over.
that's it.
Yeah.
See, everyone, you've been warned.
If you come in the summer, that will probably not happen. Verified.
Fair enough. So let's say it is our first time in your city. Are there any must-do touristy things before we get into the fun sort of niche kind of stuff?
There is. The French Quarter is a must do. I unfortunately Bourbon Street is a must do. It depends on how much you want to do it. Whenever I have friends come into town, they're always like, I'm really, really sorry. Can you please take us on Bourbon Street? And I always say, I will take you once. You get one time, one shot. You have to see it. Some people are happy and fine just walking down it in the daytime. Other people want to do it at night, but I will only do it once. But it's like going to Las Vegas and not seeing the strip. You have to see it. But there's so many different other parts of the French Quarter that are beautiful and lovely. But the French Quarter is absolutely a must do.
Yeah, that I've been once, and it was for a football bowl game my senior year in college, and it was over New Year's Eve, and it was,
Oh
yeah,
gosh.
I'll do it once. I'll do
Yeah,
Bourbon Street once. That's it.
that's all you need. I mean, for me, once enough. But then you get off and you go down, Royal Street or, Esplanade or a lot of the side streets, and you really get into the quarter and the architecture and the ironwork and the stores and the history and the beauty. But you do kind of, I hate to admit it, you do have to do that sticky stroll down at least once to say
At,
you did.
at least once.
Mhm.
Are there any touristy things that you suggest just skipping? I mean, we've done Bourbon Street, but is there anything we can sort of skip?
I would love to say skip Bourbon Street, but you can't. You kind of have to do it. No, I mean, you were talking about New Orleans, is one of the things that I love about it. It's just, it's different. It's a different experience for everyone. Just like Mardi Gras, there's so many different ways that you can celebrate it. I hate to say skip the beignets at Cafe du Monde. Beignets are some of my favorite. If you have time and you're going to do it, I always recommend the Cafe du Monde in City Park. The one down in the French Quarter, you're sometimes standing there for an hour in line. It's not the best smelling. There's people kind of standing around and they hassle you for money. If you have to do it, do it. If you have time, take the streetcar, take an Uber up to City Park. It's the same owner, the Cafe du Monde. There's gazebos. It's outside. It's indoors. Also, you're going to have live oaks, trees, ducks. It's much more pleasant, much more mellow. The exact same thing. So if you want to get your beignet fix in, I would recommend City Park. On the weekends, pretty much from the morning until the afternoon, it's going to be packed.
Wow.
Get up early if you want to go to some of the local places, because on the weekends, locals really don't show up until around 10. So if you are an early riser and you want to get some famous local places, try on the weekends, try and get in there at least before like 9:30. That's when the locals kind of wake up and come in after that.
Just depends how long you spent on Bourbon Street the night before,
It
right?
does. It does. And the great thing about Cafe du Monde in City Park, this is one of my highest recommendations, is the sculpture gardens there. And
Hmm.
it's right by the art museum and it's free and it's fabulous. And it just expanded, it doubled in size during COVID. So you can come in and there's these beautiful live oaks. One is the dueling oak, which is where all the famous, not famous, but high society Creole men would slash each other or shoot each other to death underneath this giant oak tree.
Okay.
You can walk around the sculpture garden, and then it's just a, gosh, 3-minute walk to Cafe du Monde. So you can spend get some beignets, some coffee, and then go to the sculpture garden, which is free and absolutely gorgeous.
Very cool. So I know I gave you sort of some themes to where I've been introducing this Roaming Yeti day off, sort of choose your own adventure in your city kind of thing. Um, and I know we were talking and I think you have a very interesting sort of niche and something that people are going to be very interested in. So what are we talking about here?
Talking cemeteries. I am a cemetery nerd. The cemetery culture in New Orleans is it's, it's beautiful and it's unique. It's very special. Cemeteries are definitely a part of our lives. I started doing these tours because I wrote a book on them. I'm on the board of Savers Cemeteries. I lecture on New Orleans history, and I would frequently be in the cemeteries doing my research and watch people, come into the cemeteries and stand in front of a specific tomb, have no idea what they were looking at it or the significance or the symbolism behind it. And I found myself kind of not attacking them, but just kind of going up and starting giving them tours, whether they wanted it or not, telling them about the tombs and about the people who live in there and the different symbolism that's involved. They are each cemetery. That's the one thing I try and impart on my tours is each cemetery is so different and so neat, unique in New Orleans. And there's all these just beautiful different ones to explore. And they are like outdoor museums. It has
Mhm.
art, it has history, it has scandal, it has symbolism, it has all the things that I enjoy. It kind of checks everything off the box.
How many how many cemeteries are there that can be visited within New Orleans?
There's 42 cemeteries. There's different types. Some are locked, some you have to get access through a licensed tour. Other ones are closed to the general public. If you know someone, usually I know almost all the sextons and the superintendents and the grave diggers, so I myself can get into a lot of them. But even the ones there's a lot that are open and available. Everyone tends to flock to St. Louis number one. Lafayette number one, which is run by the city, has been closed since 2019, and they're just getting ready to reopen again. And they're going to have very kind of specific restrictions and guidelines to go in and visit. But most cemeteries tend to be open to the general public. But I do advise taking a tour. It
Hmm.
really opens your eyes up to really gives you a better understanding of the culture and the history in New Orleans.
I mean, could you, obviously, because we're not looking at anything, but like, could you sort of explain the some of the cultural significance of the New Orleans cemeteries?
Well, so New Orleans was founded in 1718, and we are below sea level.
Hmm.
And so the earliest burials, they just kind of happen along the Mississippi River. We just kind of tucked the body in. The first cemetery was in the French Quarter in 1725, which was St. Peter Street. And this was when the French Quarter was the entire city of New Orleans at the time, which most people still think the French Quarter is the entire city of New Orleans.
Right.
Like it's not. It was below ground burials. So during this time, after digging a couple feet, water's coming up. They have records of people standing on the coffins, trying to get the coffins to go down. They had a very short-lived plan of we should just drill holes in the coffin to get them to sink down. But nobody liked to think of dad, kind of being in this swampy, muddy coffin. So that didn't really last very long. But then they'd have a heavy rain and grandma would literally pop up and float down the street.
Wow.
So during this time period, they thought dead bodies, dead animals, rotting fruit emitted all these poisonous vapors that cause diseases like yellow fever and cholera. So they shut it down and they moved it outside to St. Louis number 1 in 1789, which is our oldest existing. And
Okay.
that's when we started doing primarily above ground burials. And that not only has to do with disease, but it has to do a lot with our European and our Caribbean influence.
Hmm.
And originally they were very simple and kind of basic, more functional than form. But then this French architect named Jacques Dupuy comes over from Paris. He brings a sketchbook of Père Lachaise, the famous cemetery there. Everyone sees these sketches, kind of flips out, loses their mind. Um, the Mississippi River and the railroad open up, which allow us more access to different types of material. The highest point in Louisiana is Mount Driscoll, which is like a whopping, I think it's like 525 feet tall. So
Wow. Okay.
Louisiana has no natural stone. Everything has to be, imported in. And then you have immigrants that are coming in from all over the world and bringing their own artistic and aesthetic, values to the city. So it kind of built up from there. So you have these really elaborate, gorgeous marble mausoleums to your very kind of simple brick tombs to these different sculptures and symbolisms that are involved. I always like the kind of more modest tombs that tell the story, and that's kind of how I first became interested. I was always interested in cemeteries, but doing some research, I found a lot of the books tended to be based on architecture and a little dry, were these beautiful photos that would just say a mayor is buried here, or he was a businessman. And you're like, well, that's not interesting. So I started out to really tell the stories of the people who were buried in this tomb. And I've kind of evolved where I'm working on a book on symbolism in New Orleans
Oh,
Cemetery,
cool.
which is my latest obsession.
And were sorry, I feel like these questions are probably very elementary, but
No, no.
I don't know anything about them. So, um, were like certain cemeteries for like the wealthy or affluent, or like how, or was it based on where you were living, or
A lot of it's based on your living in your neighborhood because people tend to stick to the same neighborhoods.
right?
So a lot of the tomb designs will look very similar in certain cemeteries. You'll see certain tomb designs and certain symbolism, like St. Vincent de Paul. A lot of Germans and a lot of Italians there. They have more examples of variations of weeping willows carved on the front of their tombs
Hmm.
than any other cemetery.
Hmm.
And there's some symbols that you find in some cemeteries that you don't find in others. And some of that's just the trend. I kind of liken it to like shag carpeting and track lighting. It's just a style and a trend. And so certain symbolism you might find or tomb styles in some cemeteries you don't really find in others. It has to do with who the tomb builder was, what the neighborhood was, what supplies were necessary, and what trends were happening during the time period when the cemetery came up.
It's really fascinating. Do you have a favorite cemetery?
I was like whichever one I'm standing in the moment. It's my favorite.
Fair enough.
I do love Metairie Cemetery. Metairie Cemetery is the only, which is in New Orleans, by the way. That's one of the biggest fallacies, I guess I would say. So there used to be a canal. Metairie Cemetery was the dividing line between New Orleans and Metairie. When they filled the canal in for the interstate in the 50s, for some reasons, nobody really knows why. I'm sure money changed hands. They changed the boundaries of the city of Metairie. So now Metairie starts behind Metairie Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
It's still called Metairie Cemetery. So people are like, well, I want to see a cemetery in New Orleans. You are in New Orleans. It's called Metairie Cemetery. But Metairie Cemetery is the only rural park-like cemetery that we have in New Orleans.
Mm.
It's 150 acres, over 1,000 oak trees, more $1 million mausoleums probably than all the other cemeteries combined. Anne Rice is there, Al Copeland, the founder of Popeye's Chickens. There's some Storyville Madams. There's just the stained glass, the mausoleums, the sculptures, the stories. That probably is my favorite. And the shade, which is an extra added bonus, but there's not a lot of shade in the cemeteries. So it is probably the most, rural park-like cemetery, which is based off of, Paris started the rural cemetery. It's the most influential cemetery probably in the world.
Mm.
Cemeteries. So I do like strolling around Metairie. It's much more like a park, I have to say.
It sounds beautiful. And I guess, I don't know if this falls into sort of what your expertise, but I read a lot about sort of dark tourism.
Mhm.
And I would think this falls into that, and how certain people don't find the reverence in it, and they sort of act, I'm just going to say stupid,
Yeah,
and
like
stuff.
we have on Bourbon Street. Yeah,
Yeah.
but we do have with Norms, we have a lot of, ghost tours and voodoo tours and haunted tours and murder tours. And it honestly depends on the company or the tour guide. I've been on some really good ones, and then I've been on some that are just awful. I always find my background is literature, so I love details. I was never really a history fan until I came to New Orleans. And then when I learned that, truth is stranger than fiction, New Orleans is very, very much like that. So I do get a little irritated when tour guides or people will just kind of get lazy with story and make stories up or add embellishments because you really don't need to.
Hmm.
The history is just absolutely amazing, and there is such an interesting culture to New Orleans. But you do have that where you have the, vampires live here, or then the Ursuline convent, and there's some grisly murders and some hauntings, and New Orleans is supposed to be the most haunted city, New Orleans. And I believe there is some truth to some of that, but you really have to kind of pick your tour and pick your tour guide wisely if you're interested in something that's authentic. If you want to be entertained, walk
Right.
around a cocktail and have somebody tell you wild stories that may or may not be true, then take your pick. It
Right.
just depends.
Um, yeah, I mean it's funny when for some reason when I think of New Orleans, and I feel like literature and history are just very intertwined there. Like it's because there's so many stories, but they are historical stories. Like
Yeah, they
it's
are. And we do tend to latch on to anyone who comes in. We do have the Degas house, the
okay.
painter Eric Degas. Oh God, I think he was only here for a few months. It was his brother's house, but we're like, Eric Degas was here. Degas was here. But we do have other people like Faulkner and Tennessee Williams and people who actually stayed and lived here for quite a while and may influence. And Anne Rice, who passed, oh, it would be 2 years this December. No, 2 years this December. She's probably had the most influence. And I like taking people to her tomb and telling some personal Anne Rice stories, and had varying degrees there. Her fan club has the Vampires Ball.
Oh.
I believe it's the Saturday before Halloween, which they do every year. And then they had it this year, and then they had a second line for her for the first time the Sunday after.
Mm.
Well, I was in the cemetery giving tours, and for the whole week leading up to that, every time I was in the cemetery, there'd be some random vampire walking around, would run into me and ask me for directions to Anne Rice's tomb. But we came there, my tour came there right after the second line, and there was probably about 20 or 30 people there. Her tomb was just covered. A lot of vampires, a lot of people dressed in hooded cloaks who were kind of kneeling and praying and touching her tomb. And I remember this guy on my tour was like, I wish those people would get out of the way so we can get a picture. And I'm like, that's the photo.
Right.
You're not
That's the picture.
you're not going to see that again. And her assistant was there, and I ended up talking to her assistant. And but Anne Rice's tomb is has probably become tie for the Angel of Grief, or they call it the Weeping Angel, probably the most two visited tombs in Metairie Cemetery. But you do have that dark influence, and there's offerings left to on Anne Rice's tomb mausoleum all the time.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I I didn't realize that's where she was buried, but yeah, I mean some of her books and just her writing and stuff, I can see that people would definitely pilgrimage there to see that.
Well, there's a lot of pilgrimages. I've had people react very differently. I had one girl, woman, she had come on my tour. She was fairly, probably like early 20s. I hate to say girl, sorry. She'd come on my tour, and are we going to see Anne Rice's tomb? And I said, yes, that's part of it. And she told me that her dad used to read Anne Rice to her as bedtime stories, and her father had just passed recently. And we got to Anne Rice's tomb, she just burst into tears.
Oh,
And she's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was like, no, 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 it's fine. It's totally fine. She just became very emotional and overwhelmed. Her father just died right around the same time that Anne Rice had died. And it was such a big part of her, childhood and growing up. And Anne Rice has definitely done her influence by bringing attention to New Orleans, and kind of sharing her love of the city and its mysteries.
yeah, exactly. That I'm not sh That's a interesting choice for bedtime stories.
It
So
is. It
I
is.
I applaud them, but ooh, I don't know that'd work in this house.
I don't know. I know. When she told me that, I was like, oh, well, that's, a first. And that's a great thing also about tours, because people tell me things. I
Right.
learn from people on my tour as well, which is nice.
Yeah. It's how long, like if you're going for a tour with you, like how long is a tour, or what would people expect?
The different tours, they tend to run, I do one that's about an hour and 15, hour and a half. Metairie tends to be 2.5 hours. And honestly depends on the group,
Hmm.
and the group size. I like to keep it as personal as possible. So I always ask people, what do you want to see? What are you interested in? Sometimes I'll get a group that, maybe just want to see something different, or interested in, stained glass. So I'll veer around that. Some people have lots of questions. I did, a few weeks ago, ended up doing my hour and a half, hour, 15-minute tour, ended up being a little bit over 2 hours, because I had this couple who had done about 12 tours. Like, they were serious, and I was their last one. And then I said, well, if you hear any misinformation, if I'm telling you anything different, I would be very curious to hear. So then it kind of opened up this floodgate of, I heard this, is this true? No, no, that's not true. Is this true? Is this true? So it averages about an hour and a half to about 2 hours, but I remain flexible with what people want. What do they want to learn? What do they want to see? And try and, kind of mold it around them.
That's that's cool. Are there any are there museums that are sort of related to the subject, or are there any other places that if this is what someone's coming down and they've taken your tour, that there's other places that they can go learn about the stories and architecture and so forth?
Not so much in the cemeteries, but the Backstreet Culture Museum is probably one of my favorites. That has to do, with a lot of like Mardi Gras Indians, African American culture in New Orleans, Mardi Gras Indian costumes, artifacts, photographs, memorabilia. The World War II Museum, which is not New Orleans, but it is an amazing, amazing museum. And my biggest tip is, sometimes when I do the afternoon tour and it gets out about 3 o'clock, and people will look at their watch and be like, oh, I can do the, World War II Museum for a couple hours. No, no. I'm like, no, you can't.
Right.
Don't do it. You need at minimum half a day.
Okay.
Um, I would say try and give yourself at least 4 hours to go through that museum. And even then you're just going to be, you know, scratching the surface. But the Backstreet Culture Museum and the World War II Museum, like I said, the sculpture garden, which you can do on your own. I don't think they offer any tours of that, which is just beautiful. and just kind of, immerse yourself in the culture, which is great.
Um, so I mean, you want to keep yourself fed and fed and beveraged as well. Are there good places around, you
Oh my,
know,
there's good places everywhere. Yeah, there's good places everywhere. I tend to go with the places that I tend to go to over and over again. We have, that have been here for decades. Um, I now have friends, and my boyfriend especially, he loves to go to new restaurants, and I'm kind of like, but why don't we just go to one that I know is going to be good? So we compromise a lot with that. Uh, I would say some of my favorite restaurants. One is Crepe Nanu, which I've been going to as long as I've been in New Orleans. It's uptown, small little restaurant, French restaurant. They have a crawfish crepe and a crab meat and spinach crepe. It's just small, intimate. They just started taking reservations a few years ago before it was kind of first come, first serve. And every time I go there, I see somebody that I know. And it's just it's a small restaurant. When you see a restaurant where locals are going to stand outside for an hour to get in, you know that it's good.
right?
Um, Uptown, it's kind of off Britannia Street, so it's not really on people's radar. I also love Lola's, which is another small restaurant. It's a Spanish restaurant on Esplanade Avenue. If you love garlic, like you walk in there and you open the doors and just garlic
Just
comes
hit you.
in. Oh my God, it's amazing. They have really great paella and fideuà, and they do grilled calamari, which I've never seen
Hmm.
anyone else do. And then also in that neighborhood by the fairgrounds, I always recommend before or after my tour of St. Louis number 3, which is La Uses by the track. I don't want to say a dive. I don't want to say that on public dive, but it's not fancy. Let's just say that. And all the locals go there. Amazing food. You can get like etouffee and shrimp remoulade and gumbo and some jambalaya. You can also get some po' boys, their barbecued shrimp po' boy. That's where my brother goes every time he comes into town. They keep their beer mugs in the freezer,
Oh,
huge
okay.
glass beer mugs, which is really big. All the cops eat there, so you know that it's good. Just a great small little local restaurant that would probably never be on people's radars. There's two Liuzes, but Liuzes, Liuzzas by the track is my favorite to go. Those are kind of my favorite mainstays. And then Superior Seafood. Yeah, I could talk about food a lot. Superior Seafood on Napoleon, on St. Charles Avenue. Cross street is Napoleon. Great happy hour. And they have my favorite grilled oysters.
Okay.
Happy hours every day. I can't remember if it's 4:30 to 6 or 4 to 6, but it's every day. It's, even Saturday and Sunday. And it's $1 raw oysters, which unfortunately I don't eat. And it's I think it's some price off beer and wine, and you can get their large frozen drinks, their French 75 or their, I believe it's the basil pomegranate frozen drink for the large for like a regular.
Oh, wow.
It's really good.
It's a good happy hour spot. And all week, that's impressive.
Yeah, every day.
Nice. Um, what I mean, I think you've already mentioned a bunch of them, but like what food is that quintessential New Orleans food that people really should try to eat when they're visiting?
It's hard. So for me, it's not just the quintessential New Orleans food, it's the quintessential New Orleans experience. I love
Okay.
crock rolls. I'm kind of famous for them among my friends. Like I don't make any friends. I'm elbowing like little old ladies and little children out of the way to get to the crawfish boil table. It's really bad. Um, but the crawfish boil, it's, you have your friends and you get together and you boil the crawfish, and you usually dump it out, lay newspapers out on a big table outside, and just dump the pot
Yep.
onto the table. And some people put, my friend does his with pineapple in it, which is just amazing, and whole heads of garlic.
Interesting.
Really, really good. And then you have potatoes and the sausage and the corn, but I only like to have room in my stomach for the crawfish. So of course that's seasonal. It tends to start around Mardi Gras, and it's just ending now around May. But the crawfish boil, if you can actually go to one, it's it's just everybody just stands around and eats and drinks and, peels off the crawfish. It's great. But for the food, for me, Easy food would be a poor boy. Definitely have a poor boy. And I love etouffee, crawfish etouffee, and gumbo. I would say a cup of gumbo.
Um, Now getting around the city, like what's the best way to do it? Like walking, public transportation, ride share?
So a few years ago, and I'm doing an updated version right now. I co-wrote and photographed this book called 11 Places Not to Miss in New Orleans. And they're a European country and or company, and they have guidebooks all over the world that they do, like you not to miss in Chicago and Key West and Paris. And every book has a specific format, and then it's like how to get to these things by public transportation. And the other writer and I were like, yeah, that's just not possible. And they're like, you have to do it because this is our format. And we finally convinced them, we're like, yeah, it's not really the best. It's not hard. New Orleans is very small and it's
Mhm.
very flat, so it's easy to get around. But even then, if say you're going to catch a streetcar and you want to go to Magazine Street, you're going to get off the streetcar and you're going to walk, gosh, what, 5, 6, 7, 8 blocks. The streetcar system, I mainly use the streetcars for entertainment,
Mhm.
is one of my favorite things to do, and I bring friends on it. Get on the streetcar uptown or down off Canal Street and ride the streetcar down St. Charles Avenue, and just look at the beautiful oak trees and the mansions and the architects or architecture, not architects. I don't think there's architects just standing on the street.
Well, there could be. You don't
Architecture,
know. It's
it could be. There could be some standing there. But that's one of my favorite things to do. But to rely on it, speedy, not the best, but you can get an RTA pass. I think it's $3 a day and it gets you on and off. So don't, if you're not someone who's going to be scheduled within an inch of your life and you have to be or it's a specific time, streetcar is great. And you look at it as an adventure and fun.
Mhm.
Um, but really not, it's not like we have, and some of the buses only go in certain areas, but you can catch an Uber or a Lyft pretty easily.
Yeah,
And if you're in the French Quarter, you walk.
right.
Yeah. So a lot of times you can get places, get dropped off, and just walk, wear comfy shoes, and hydrate.
Hydrate.
Yes, hydration's big.
Alternate water, hurricane, right?
Exactly.
Is there I always ask this question, is there a souvenir that people should bring home?
Gosh. Well, we were talking about this early. When I travel, I always like to go to the local independent bookstores.
Mhm.
And all the bookstores we have in New Orleans, in Orleans Parish, are independent. So I always like to go and buy children's books. I like to see what the or some local authors. But that's me. I would say there's a lot of local artists. There's Dutch Alley Co-op, which is in the French Quarter,
Mhm.
which has over 25 local artists. You can get everything from, jewelry to ceramics to painting, textile art, kind of everything there. Block prints, which is great. I like to get mine from local artists. There's also multiple mass shops. Some are better than others, most definitely. People tend to like to get the t-shirts and the beads, which is fine, but I always like to go for the local artists. And Dutch Alley is probably the best place that you can find local art. Very inexpensive too. You can
Yeah.
pick up something nice, fairly inexpensive.
Yeah, I think I always uh, I've come to that where I'm looking for something different or something that is more related to what we did on a trip to bring home,
Yeah.
um, rather than um, you know, anything that you would normally see in a normal gift shop. Um, so I love that idea of going to a bookstore, or the local market and supporting some of the local artists, which is
Yeah.
because then you have a one of a kind of thing at home too.
You do. Like we just ended Jazz Fest here, and that's one of my favorite things to do is hit the artist booth and the food. It really is. It's just eat at Jazz Fest basically, and then try and burn off by dancing. But yeah, they have a lot of the contemporary arts, the local artists, a lot of artists from all over. So also a great place to support your local artist.
I love that. So I always have a few questions at the end that I don't send ahead of time. It's sort of my
Oh,
fun pop quiz for everyone. So
okay.
don't worry, it's easy. Um, what are your favorite, if you're going on a road trip, what snack are you taking with you? What's your road trip snack go to?
Oh gosh. Diet Pepsi. I don't know if that's a snack. Water to stay away because I road trip a lot. When I go on really long road trips, I mean, we're talking 4 or 5 days. I drive cross
Oh,
country.
okay.
I sometimes like to take sunflower seeds,
Hmm.
like in the shell, because it can keep me entertained. I'm like spitting them out the window, which is kind of gross. And I always, if I go for more than 8 hours anywhere, I always like to go through and get a Dairy Queen soft serve.
Hmm.
I don't know, I feel like I deserve it.
Yeah,
Like I kind of earned it, even though I've done nothing but sit in a car and drive. I
it's
also love grapes. I love,
grapes.
but that's hard to keep it. That's kind of like early trip,
Yeah,
by you
it's
know.
first day, first
But
morning.
first day, I plan ahead and I have my cooler and everything's nice and neat. And then by like day three, it's just a disaster.
No, I have a philosophy that road trip food has the calories don't count.
No,
So
it absolutely does not count.
I think the
Yeah.
Dairy Queen is we have gas stations up here called Sheets, and I have become a big I get milkshakes when we stop on road trips now, like so
Well, our
that's
gas stations here are famous for their fried chicken.
okay.
That's a whole underground thing here. A lot of people go here to gas stations to get their fried chicken. It's a whole kind of it's a
Now,
whole
do you have Buc-ee's stations down there?
I don't think so. I think my boyfriend told me he's like, oh, he had heard that one was coming up or something. Um, no. When I road trip, I try and because I'll drive sometimes from New Orleans to Seattle, Washington, and it's quite a trip with my
Yeah.
dog. And I try and go for the Love's gas stations because they
Okay.
usually have a pet area.
Hmm.
So I can get him out of the car, take him off his leash, and he can, roam around and smell, and I can kind of sit and be quiet. So I always look for the Love's gas stations when I travel.
That's good. Good. Is there a favorite trip that you've taken in your lifetime?
Well, I just went to I've taken a lot of really great trips just in the last 6 months.
Hmm.
I went to Paris during Thanksgiving this year and spent a lot of time in the cemeteries, which was amazing. And then we went to Cuba in February, also went to the cemetery in there, which I hate to say this, but hands down, the sculpture in Havana, the cemeteries, is the best I've ever seen.
Interesting.
Absolutely. There's really not a lot written about it. You don't really have a lot of photos on it. Obviously, absolutely amazing. What I wouldn't give to be able to fly a drone, which they had signs everywhere you're not, and I didn't have one anyway, but I would love to do a drone there. And that was probably one of in Australia when I was young and stupid, like 21 with my best friend. We just bought a ticket that was on sale. Didn't read any books, any plans, and just showed up in Australia for about almost 3 weeks and had a blast.
Those are, I feel like those are the best trips. I can't go unplanned anymore, but in my 20s, those were the best.
I look back
Just
now,
show
like we
up.
land, and it is funny when I travel. I like to. When I travel out of the country, I like to go to McDonald's. It's the only
Mm.
time I really go to McDonald's. And one time I went to a McDonald's in Ireland, and I was talking to this woman, and her babysitter I went to school with. And then my friend and I landed in Australia at like 7 in the morning. We went to McDonald's and we're standing in line at this McDonald's in Sydney. And behind her was her dad was a cop, was her dad's partner in line at the McDonald's in Sydney, Australia. And then my favorite McDonald's experience was in Japan. And to me, it was very much a cultural experience where you have, I mean, everybody sees here how you have the Egg McMuffin meal. You have the egg McMuffin and the hash brown, and it comes with, it says Diet Coke, but we all know other things. So I said, okay, they had Coke. I'll have my Egg McMuffin meal with the Diet Coke. No, 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 no. You can't get the Diet Coke. And I was like, why? And I was like, is it not working? And they're like, no, it comes with Coke, orange juice, or coffee. That's it. It's not Diet Coke. It's not, they take it very literally. So
Right.
like, okay, I'll have an Egg McMuffin separately, a hash brown separately, and a Diet Coke. And they were on to me. They were like, no. And they were like, no, we're not going to give it to you. And then of course you feel like the obnoxious American. But it was like, that was the sign that's up. It comes with a Coke, orange juice, or coffee. Doesn't come with tea, doesn't come with Sprite, doesn't come with Diet Coke. Like that's it. Like it was very literal. This is how it is. This is the only way we're serving you. And that's it. So I thought that was really fun.
Yeah.
And interesting. So
The literal translation of it all.
I did not go to one in Paris. I should have. We saw that, and as soon as we landed at the airport, I was like, "There's a McDonald's. We're going." And my boyfriend's like, "We are not." First meal, but they had a croissants, really nice, really good, at the Paris McDonald's. Which, as I'm saying this now, I forgot that we didn't go in one, so I have to go
You'll
back.
have to go back. Exactly.
That will be my excuse.
So I'm gonna twist the next one, because usually it's a sort of a bucket list trip that you want to go on, but I'm gonna ask you, given the cemeteries, is there a cemetery somewhere in the world that or something similar that you really want to visit that you haven't made it to yet?
I do want to see the cemeteries in Scotland. I had been there before, but this is before I was kind of really aware of cemeteries. Savannah. I'd like to go back and spend more time in Paris. We just went to two. I'd like to really kind of hit all of them. When I drive cross country this summer, I'm going to hit some more as I drive. But right now, Greenwood in New York is probably big on my list. Savannah is big on my list for in the United States. Cuba was huge. That was kind of a huge check off. So I feel like I kind of not pacified myself from a little while, but I'm like a lot calmer. And I'd love to go see the cemeteries in Italy. I'd probably say Scotland, Italy, Savannah, New York. I went to Hollywood Forever this summer, which I loved. That's probably my favorite outside New Orleans, United States cemetery thus far. Very quirky, very unusual. I mean, where else can you go to a cemetery where there's a bust of Burt Reynolds in a cowboy hat? It's just amazing.
That is amazing.
It was just like, it had all this, sometimes you had statues to the people. You had a lot of Egyptian architecture, some neoclassical, some modern, and it's really beautiful park. It's not that big, and it's right in the middle of Hollywood. I absolutely loved it. I loved it. That was probably, and I went to some cemeteries in Alaska. I went to a Russian cemetery in Alaska, which was really interesting. So when I travel, it's just interesting noting the different symbolism and the symbols that people have that they don't have in other places. Like my two favorite symbols, sorry, off topic, in cemeteries tend to be the hourglass with wings, which represents that time is fleeting, and the inverted torch, which represents that a life is extinguished. So I get to Paris and I'm like, oh my God, there's an hourglass with wings. Oh, there's another and another and another. It's everywhere. Like it's everywhere. And it's sprinkled. The hourglass with wings, you'll see them in some cemeteries in New Orleans. It's not as dominant. The inverted torch is a lot more common. But Paris had a lot of owls, which I thought was fascinating. Lots of owls, lots of snakes, lots of bats. And I've been to the cemetery in Boston too, which is also really interesting because at that time, the Puritans didn't believe that you should have depictions of God. So it was a lot of, skulls and crossbones and body parts, which also very interesting. Yeah.
Very cool. So as you're traveling across country, what do you have on your travel playlist?
Oh gosh, I take my travel playlist very seriously. Very, very seriously. In the morning, I usually start out with a playlist that I have called Mostly Mellow Dudes, which tends to be really mellow. I don't know why mellow men. And then I'll move into more kind of like upbeat. Um, I have tons of different playlists. Sometimes it's like 1950s, 80s music. I love hip hop. And then usually around 2 or 3, because when I seriously drive, which my boyfriend hates, I'll do 13, 14 hours. Like
Yeah.
I drive. And so usually by the middle of the afternoon, I move more into audiobooks. So the morning tends to be from like 6 to about 2. Start out my morning kind of mellow, and then I get more upbeat. And then by 2 or 3, I go into audiobooks. Lonesome Dove will get you across country. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I like that there's a plan to that. Like it's not just, oh, I put a bunch of songs on that I like. It's
No,
a very well thought out plan.
it is. I have multiple playlists on my phones from that I make all the time that I spend a lot of time on. And sometimes it will be like Badass Broads, which is mostly like, blues women. And then I have Headbang, which is a lot of like, AC/DC and things like that to kind of pump me up. I have a Beatles and a Stones, about 6 different Christmas ones, funk, soul, and disco. Laid Back Ladies, which is the other side, flip side to the mostly mellow dudes.
Yep.
Like, Louis Armstrong, hands down, New Orleans, straight disco, things like that. And sometimes I even have road trips, which is just kind of my favorite songs that are going to keep me awake and going. But I spend a few hours plotting out my playlist before I go.
I like that. I've done that, so I feel that.
I'm like, okay, you can't listen to this music. Don't listen to this for a few weeks, your favorite song, so you can, listen to it when you're on the drive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I appreciate this information so much. I think it gives definitely a different insider perspective on New Orleans that people can go check out, and especially for people who, you know, have already gone and done the touristy things or aren't interested in the touristy things. This definitely gives them a bunch of ideas and things to look for. And like I said, I will make sure I get the website and links from you for your tour so that people, when they're coming down, can actually book you and get the correct and expert knowledge.
Well, I say my other recommendation is we are a festival city.
Hmm.
Jazz Fest and French Quarter Fest tend to get the biggest draw. There's almost always a festival happening, always on some weekend. So just kind of Google festivals for the weekend. This weekend is Bayou Boogaloo,
Hmm.
which is on Bayou St. John, which is the neighborhood that's my favorite neighborhood. It's the neighborhood I'm in. And it's just right on the bayou, and they set up and they have music and bands and art and food. So yeah, there's oh my gosh, snowball festivals, fried chicken festivals, Creole festival, yeah, the Creole Tomato Festival, the Mississippi River Festival, the Danny Barker Festival, the Satchmo Fest, Louis Armstrong Festival. There's almost always a festival going on every weekend. And aside from, like I said, the French Quarter Fest and the Jazz Fest, and which is the most known,
Hmm.
there's almost always a festival, and there's locals there, and it's almost always food, music, and art. Like that tends to be the main theme of these festivals, regardless of what
the theme is.
yeah, yeah, you'll find food, music, and art. My favorite things. So
Exactly. I was like, what more do you need?
what more do you need? Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time, so thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Sally of RedSashTours.com for sharing her passion and expertise. Be sure to check out the show notes on theroamingyeti.com to get links to follow Sally, book a tour with her, or purchase one of her books. And thank you for listening. I hope these episodes inspire you to get out there and roam, even in your own neighborhood. Please subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you like what we're doing here, please leave a review and a rating. Also, to help support us, please head to yeti2shop.com to pick up some Roaming Yeti merch. Talk to you soon, and keep roaming.